Welcome to Passive Aggressive Income. This program may contain strong language. The content may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 17. We understand many of our listeners may not agree with all of our personal viewpoints. We in no way, shape, or form mean to be offensive to anyone. Our show notes will provide all of our source material included for each episode. Now let's get passive aggressive.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Passive Aggressive Income. We are your hosts, Lexi and Mims. Thank you for joining us on another week. This week, we are going to be talking about some real estate topics that Mims and I are going to hand in hand discuss. And then next week, also, we'll be talking about more real estate stuff. So, very excited about that.
So today we're going to be talking about things to look out for when purchasing investment property. I'm excited about this. I know we just said that we're excited for every topic that we talk about, but I think this is the fun part of every part is the fun part for investing. But I think like when you first fall in love with the investment property that you're about to buy. So we have some tips on what you should look out for, what are some things that may go in your favor when purchasing. So let's talk about how you are approved for a loan on your first or maybe your next investment property. And it's time to tour some properties and zero in on, what it all has to offer. You may have wondered, what should I look out for when purchasing a home or investment property that isn't a new build? Obviously, new builds are just like cookie cutter. This is what you're going to get. It's brand new, 2023. So you really aren't looking for a lot of things that are going wrong with it. I mean, it shouldn't be, but there
Shouldn't
could be,
be.
I guess, if it's not done correctly. But the majority of the properties that we're talking about is like 100 years old, 50 years old, just like those ones that have been sitting there for a while.
Yeah, well loved. And
Well loved.
before we get started here, I also want to say, even if you are buying a new build, make sure that you're still getting it inspected because
Hmm.
you don't really know who is building the house and what kind of things they ran into. So just because it's brand new, don't expect to not have to do anything.
Yeah, that's so true. Good point. So, on this episode, we are here to tell you what to look out for so that we can, avoid hefty expenses down the road if you are able to. Again, as we have stated in our disclaimers, this is advice purely based off of experience and preferences. We are not licensed in anything, so don't take this as legal or financial advice. So, let's talk about big picture right off the bat. Maybe you're interested in a rundown property with good bones. There is nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you have to look past the hoarded out, busted to bits conditions to see the actual potential of it. And what my husband and I do when we do our driving for dollars is that we do look at properties that have the big, massive bushes that are covering the property, that you can barely see, the property structure, or the five cars in the driveway that are not moving or going anywhere, or the siding that may be coming off a little bit. So I know it's hard to not shy away from those because then you think, oh, that's going to be a lot of work, but sometimes you can get the best deals from that type of property.
Mhm.
So my personal advice is that if the purchase price makes sense for what it is, the rest of the numbers make sense along with the cost of remodeling and the location is great, you may have found yourself a diamond in the rough. From personal experience, we purchased the ugly duckling in a beautiful neighborhood. And I know I mentioned this before, it was right by the YMCA, right by an amazing walking trail and walking distance from downtown. But and the purchase price made sense, the location made sense, and the estimated rent that we could pull made sense, that it was just a no-brainer at that point. Now the neighbors who have lived on the same street for years look upon it and they have come up to us and thanked us for making it look better. And that just warmed my heart and made me feel like, okay, we did something good, not only for the neighborhood, but for ourselves as well.
hmm Yeah, and when you look at that house that has like the overgrown bushes or that has like obvious problems, you need to think about like, well, is this an easy fix? Because sometimes like which we'll go into in a little bit, cosmetic issues really it's kind of like a coat of slapping a coat of paint on or trimming that bush or just getting tenants who don't have vehicles that are like rusting in the driveway that aren't moving. Like those things are pretty simple. And so if you're able to look past those, you really could get a diamond in the rough.
Right. So then that brings us to cosmetics and aesthetics. I don't know about you, Lexi, but I personally do not care about the walls, they're painted in, or the ugly carpeting, the shag carpeting,
No.
the orange carpeting that I've seen a bunch of times. I don't know why they kept it, but they do.
hmm
Um, I don't care about all that. I don't care about the cosmetic look or looks because I'm buying it. I'm not buying it for what it looks like now because I have a vision, you know?
hmm Yeah, you're
W-
going into it with expectations, and you know that the expectations you have is to like give it a little refresh. So things like that don't matter because they're not going to last. You're going to rip it out anyways or paint over it.
Right, right. What I need to know, and what you guys probably should need to know as well, is if everything is functional, the numbers make sense, the location is great, then that's bottom line, right? I can replace the carpet, which I've done and put in LVP. So that's just made it 10 times more rentable, in my opinion, because a lot of people have pets that
Yeah.
I allow. And, LVP is sought after because carpet gets soiled a lot. And, people just tend to gravitate more towards that really nice looking LVP. I can paint the walls from a really ugly green to, what I prefer to paint it to. And that creates another market for different types of renters. I
hmm
can move out the hoarded crap of stuff and clean it and replace kitchen backsplash. I can do all of that. What I can't do is buy a property and pay in or pay for or break even
hmm
just to own it. I can't do that because it doesn't make any financial sense for me to do that. So, bottom line, cosmetics, aesthetics can all be changed. What you can't change is what you're buying the property for and making the numbers make sense. You can't change that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because you have to think about the strategy of why you're purchasing this property and what you want to do with it and what you want to use it for,
Hmm.
and make sure that those numbers make sense and all of the, quick fixes or, maybe in my case, I bought a house and I'm like, okay, I'm ready for a project. I can do some things, and it ended up being a bit more of a project than I was anticipating. But if you just look at like the cosmetic things, you're like, look past it. That's easy, but making sure that the numbers make sense and that the strategy that you're going into makes sense with this property, that's priority. And I think it's really easy to make a list of what you do want in a property, X amount of bedrooms, a large living room, a nice yard, whatever. But you also have to be realistic about what you don't want. And what you don't want should go past just the cosmetic things, unless you're really not looking for any projects and you want move-in ready, but you're going to
Right,
pay a price for it.
right.
So some things to consider would be like, is too many bedrooms a deal breaker because you plan to furnish it and rent to traveling professionals who will often be living at your place on their own?
Ooh,
Or does a big garden or a big yard with a garden look really beautiful and sound nice, but if you're not planning on living at the property, then do you still want to take the time to care for it? Or especially, if you are renting the property, you can't expect the tenants to tend the garden. So while those things are really big sellers for like a single family home for for a house that you plan on moving into, you got to think about like the long term and does this make sense for the strategy that you're going for?
right. And I have bought two properties that have well-maintained landscaping and gardens. And in our lease agreement, once they move in and they see that that's what it looks like, we tell them you can keep up with it, or we can pay for somebody to go in and um, do it, but somebody's gonna have to do that because obviously it goes with the whole package of the property.
Right. That's a good point. So just because you have like a nice garden doesn't mean that's a deal breaker if you're planning on renting out. It's just another thing that you have to consider.
Right.
So some other things to consider is like, is a large property in the heart of the city what you're looking for? If you're planning on like just having a family move in, is that like the most family friendly place? So you just kind of have to think about all of these things. And also don't be afraid to get creative. We've listened to some episodes of the Bigger Pockets podcast where they interview people, and there was this one guy who bought this like crazy big mansion that had like 10 bedrooms, and something like that would have a really hard time selling. And I mean, who needs like 10 bedrooms? I don't know. I definitely don't. But so he got creative and he rented out each bedroom in this mansion and turned the house into like a little community. And so it could be really lame when you're thinking of like just renting a room in a house and like not very sought after. They turned it into this place that was actually kind of a vibe and like sought after to live there.
Yeah, I mean, if I was single and I wanted to live in a mansion, but no, I couldn't ever afford it or like would want to keep up with all that cleaning. So this is a really cool idea. And I think that not a lot of people think of it, so then not a lot of people have done it.
Hmm. Yeah, and with something like buying a mansion, obviously that's super expensive, but you can take those ideas and kind of implement it in your own way. And I think the point
Hmm.
here is just to like keep an open mind and be creative and figure out like what little niches you can squeeze into in a neighborhood that like other people aren't really doing.
And I kind of want to point out the fact that if you buy a property out in like the boonies, so like not a lot of people are out there, not a lot of grocery stores or businesses, that it may be difficult for you to find people to rent because, there's not a market there. And there may be a renter there that's going to probably die there, but you can't jack up the price because there is no competition
Mhm.
for, it to make sense. So if you do end up buying something out there, out in, the boonies, make sure that you know that you probably aren't going to get a max amount of rent from that property because there is no demand for that location.
Yeah, exactly. It's not only like trying to get creative, but you got to make sure it works for it works with the numbers, it works with your strategy, but it also works with just like the area that you're in. You have to consider all of those factors before purchasing the property.
Yes.
And then, as we've mentioned in a previous episode, and we mentioned at the beginning of this one, you got to consider what your nearby houses look like.
Hmm.
So, like Mim said, is the bushes overgrown and are there cars rotting in the driveway? Is there garbage all over the place? And you got to think about, well, what kind of tenants do I want to put in this house? And is this going to work? Is this going to feel like a safe neighborhood for the type of people that I want? And so, as an example, for my own like personal experience, the first duplex that I bought was the nicest house on the street. And there are a couple of like rougher looking houses and multifamilies next to it and nearby. And the landlords that own those properties don't take care of them. And
Hmm.
because, it's a little rough looking, they tend to not put in like the highest quality tenants. And so that
Hmm.
brings down the quality of my property. And
Right.
especially because the tenants that I'm searching for really are of the highest quality. So it's just something you have to like consider and weigh the pros and cons. So I don't regret buying my first duplex. And honestly, it's still a safe area. It's just like maybe some of the other houses aren't the prettiest. And we've had a couple of like annoying situations with the next door neighbor.
Hmm.
But all it means is that I'm extra diligent about ensuring my tenants have a good stay. So if there's like a mattress dumped across the street, then I'll report it and make sure that it gets cleaned up and the neighborhood is still nice. Or as an example, we would like walk around the block when we lived at this duplex. And there was a kind of an apartment complex with like a little retaining wall next to the sidewalk, and that retaining
Hmm.
wall was just falling apart. And
Hmm.
so we reported it because we're like, it's not a mom and pop landlord. Like, this is a big company and they can afford to like fix their shit.
Right.
And within 2 months, the retaining wall was fixed and our neighborhood was looking really nice. So,
Wow, that's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah. So, like, you have the power to do those things and make changes in your neighborhood, even if you don't own the other properties that are
Mhm.
nearby. And Alex and I actually did consider buying the house next door just to like fix it up because our duplex is like directly next to this other house and it could use some love. And some of the tenants in there have been like kind of annoying. So we've
Mhm.
considered it, but ultimately, I think that it's still a win. And we haven't actually had any like issues with our tenants complaining about like neighbors or anything like that. So, like I said,
Right.
it's just another thing that you have to consider and making sure that whatever your strategy is works in the area that you're buying in.
Yeah, and I think that it's easier to buy a duplex with people that, aren't the best renters, which we're going to get into in this topic, but I'm just going to touch on this briefly a little bit. So they're they're not the best, but you can change that by giving them 28 days. But it's hard to do that if you are looking at apartments
Mm-hmm.
or fourplexes. When you hit that multi past the multifamily, so you're looking at like a whole complex. It's hard to get rid of every single bad person because we're not bad person, bad tenant
Yeah.
because losing out on a lot. You have vacancies left and right, and it may be just a band-aid solution. You're ripping it off right away. You're getting rid of the people that you don't want to deal with on a long-term basis. But the downside is that you're going to have to flip that unit because it's probably really lived in or, a mess. And you're going to have to, if you don't go willingly, you may have to go through the eviction process. And so there's a whole bunch of domino effects to removing these people.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're buying a property that's a complex, keep in mind that you're buying the people as well because they transfer and you're buying the area. So I know the this investor that bought one that was a really good deal, but it was right across the street from a homeless shelter. And we
Mm-hmm.
got a lot of people, driving up their first day, got the keys, walking up to their brand new apartment, and they were dismayed with what they were walking to. And on the very same day that they would be moving in, it's supposed to be a joyous day. It's supposed to be like, oh, a new chapter in my life. It was just, I'm breaking my lease. I can't live here. I was being pestered walking in.
Right.
It's just a really unsafe building. There's no locks on the building. All of this comes into play. So just be mindful, especially complexes, on what you're buying.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And right, like you said, you can get rid of the annoying tenants who are giving you problems and you can replace them, but if you aren't actually doing anything to the unit and you're just keeping the same quality, then you're going to continue getting tenants who are of like the quality of the people that you just kicked out. So, yeah, you have to think about all the factors and you have to be putting in the work if you are dealing with situations that are unfavorable. Like you have to know what you're walking into.
Exactly. So let's talk about lease agreements. If you're looking to house hack, make sure to ask if the tenants are locked into a year or a month-to-month contract. If the current tenants are in a year contract, this deal may not work for you because for an owner occupying situations and for loans, you need to be living in the property within 60 days after closing. Plus, the lease supersedes the sale of the property, meaning that nothing changes until their contract expires, no matter if the ownership changed hands. So their lease is, not going to change anything, even though you bought the property. They're staying until the remainder or whatever, however long that they want to stay. And just looking into what the status is of their contract is also a good thing to do right away, because if you walk in and you can tell that they're super difficult, right off the bat, they don't want to let you in, or they're just really like antagonistic when you are walking around, they're messy or dirty, and they're on a month-to-month tenancy, you are able to give them a 28-day notice to move out. And I know that I touched base on this a little bit in a prior episode, and I put in the statute for Wisconsin on how that is legal, and you are able to do that. That doesn't mean that they're not going to fight you on it, because not a lot of people understand that the 28-day notice is an actual thing,
Hmm.
and because not a lot of people do it,
Yeah.
unless you are in a like not a mom and pop uh property. I feel like mom and pops don't really do that. It's more of the big corporation, the big guys typically do that. So 28-day notices are legal in Wisconsin. That doesn't mean that you're not going to get all the way to the court system. It's going to take longer at that point, but it is in your favor if you walk in and you don't vibe with the tenants.
Hmm.
You won't make any friends this way, but you're not in the business of making friends. It's better to cut the cord right away and then fill the units with the people you vetted and are happy with. Because if you're doing this long term, like my husband and I are doing this, we plan on owning properties until, I don't know, until we're probably 80. So I want to be happy with the people that are in there, and I want them to be happy with us. And if they're not happy with us and we're not happy with them, it's not going to be an enjoyable experience. So make sure that you are looking into what the lease agreements are before you close in on this deal.
Yeah, and I think so. Obviously, if you do plan on giving someone their 28-day notice, you need to have specific action items to be like, this is why this isn't going to work between us. But when you are vetting tenants, or if you're deciding whether to purchase a property that has tenants that you'll be inheriting, you kind of also have to trust your intuition and take that and like just listen to how you're feeling, because you could walk into a place and just like get this feeling that something is off when you're like talking to the tenants, and don't discount that.
Mm,
So I have a couple of experiences that I want to share here about deciding not to purchase a house because of the tenants, among some other reasons in some cases. But the first one is I was looking at an up-down duplex, and the tenants in one unit, and I would be house hacking, I'd be moving into the other unit. But the tenants in the other unit had just signed a year lease. And so meaning we would have to deal with them for, the remainder of their lease, almost an entire year. And they wouldn't let us see the master bedroom when we went to tour the property. And when we were outside, we could see like tinfoil hung up over the window, and like they really didn't want us to see what was going on in there.
what the
And
hell?
yeah, I know. It's just like, okay, red flags off the bat.
Yeah.
And so despite this and them just kind of like being difficult and standoffish, and like I think we showed up and they're like, oh, like we weren't expecting you. Like you weren't supposed to,
Mm,
be touring this property. And it was just kind of awkward. Um, but we ended up continuing to like go through the process, and we sent an inspector out to evaluate the property, and they wouldn't let him in. Like they said that their landlord didn't give them notice. He did, and it just became this huge thing, and eventually he did end up being able to go inside and like walk the property, and there was nothing like super apparent that he saw that was going on in that bedroom that they wouldn't let us in. But it's just kind of goes to show, like, if these people are being so difficult right off the bat when we're just touring the property or just like taking a
mhm.
look at it, then they're going to be difficult to work with, and they seem kind of sketchy, and we're going to be living in this unit, in the unit next to them too. And we just decided, especially after the results of the inspection came back, that like this isn't something we want to deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. If the tenants are dictating when showings are happening, because we've had that multiple times where we're really interested in a property, but we can't get in because the owner is just like, well, the tenants aren't, happy about these certain days or this or that. And so the tenants are basically like running the show. That's like an
Hmm.
immediate, like, I'm not dealing with these types of people. Like,
Right.
you're not standing up for yourself because this is your property.
Hmm.
You are able to say, in whatever state have a 12-hour, some other states are 20 hours, but
Yeah,
here in Wisconsin
Minnesota's
it's 12
24.
hours. Yeah, so here it's 12 hours. We're gonna schedule this out, and we don't typically do it the day after. We're not like that. So it's usually a few days out, and they still are like, nope, not enough notice, but it is.
It
They're
is.
just trying to not, they're not on board with the selling part of it, and that means that they think that they have more power than they do, which, they do live there. That is
Yeah.
their home for sure. And if they are in a year lease, they have every right to be there for that year. However, they don't run the show. That's the bottom line.
Yes. Yeah. And so just, you don't want to work with difficult people. And if it's going to be that difficult just to see the property for the first time, then like maybe you should keep looking.
Yeah.
And then my other example that I wanted to share with not deciding to purchase a house because of the tenants, this is actually on the landlord. The tenants were great. So
Hmm.
but we decided not to purchase anyway. So we looked at a duplex that it was a side by side, which is really rare in St. Paul because all the houses are so old here. Most of the duplexes are up down. So we were super
Oh,
excited about this property. And one unit had a retired vet with physical disabilities, and he had spent decades in this house. And then on the other half was his niece who was caring for him. And the vet who had been there, for who knows how long, his lease was about to be up. And with the loan terms that we got, like Mim said, we were planning on house hacking and moving in. And so we would need to be moving in within 60 days of purchasing the property. And we talked about it and we're like, this doesn't feel right. Like this old man who's like retired and has issues, like we're not going to kick him out of his house that he's lived there forever when his family is next door taking care of him. And we just like didn't have a good feeling. And so we decided not to purchase that property. And the landlord ended up communicating with our realtor and asking us like what we didn't like about the property, and we're just like, this is super unethical. And so we kind of sent that message and said like, honestly, I don't think like you should be like selling this property with like, the intention of kicking out this vet who's been there forever and like, is probably going to die there. Like it just didn't feel right. So I think ethics play a big role in deciding whether to purchase a property too. And whether it's like people being difficult or whether it's a situation like that where it just doesn't feel good to, kick someone out of their home, you have to think about it as a person too and not just an investor.
yeah, I agree. I think that the only times that you should be looking to 28 days somebody is when there is a big amount of debt owed.
Mhm.
So they're not up to date with rent. They have a laundry list of lease violations. They are doing something sketchy, and you get your spidey senses
Yeah.
going off, and you're like, something isn't right in here. Drug related or whatever the case may be. Or if they're super difficult, like we just described, they're running the show, they're the captains, and uh that is not going to be a good relationship. So making sure that you are happy with the people that are in there. And if there are people in there that you think that, like Lexi said, it's not ethical to, I need to live there,
Yeah.
and if I have to live there, these people need to move out. uh yeah, that weighs on you. So make sure that you are good with the people that are in there if they're locked in a year, or you're okay with 20 damning people that have been there for 30 years, or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So this episode has a lot of content, and we are nowhere close to the finish line with talking about things to look out for when you decide whether or not to purchase an investment property. So we're going to have a part two next week where we get into the nitty gritty about actual like structural things when it comes to what to look for in a house. So we're going to leave it off on this and make sure to tune in next week to get some action items, to get your notes out and write lists about like what exactly you need to be looking for when you're doing your walkthrough.
Right. So this week was cosmetics, lease agreements, aesthetics, strategy, and just looking at the big picture. But next week is going to be diving into what you're actually looking for, the structure and the building. So both are going to be awesome for you to keep in your back pocket when you are looking for that next property that you are going to purchase. So tune into next week to get the full version of everything you should look out for.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Passive Aggressive Income was written, recorded, edited, and produced by co-hosts and creators Mims and Lexi. We truly want to thank our listeners, collaborators, friends, and family that continuously support us for all the love we receive. If you enjoy our show, please give us a glowing rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Also, follow us on Facebook and Instagram to see what we are up to. For any inquiries, please email passiveaggressiveincome2023@gmail.com. Episodes of Passive Aggressive Income are available wherever you listen to podcasts, so make sure to subscribe and like us on your favorite streaming platform.